Welcome, everyone. It is 5:15 on Monday, November 22nd of 2021. The Carroll City Council meeting shall now commence. Will everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please note everyone is in attendance except Councilman Cox and Councilman Fleshner will probably be here shortly. The next item on our agenda is the Seaboard Foods Scoreboard check presentation. And Jack, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Tonight we have Nick Christensen and Gary Earlbeck here with Seaboard Foods that would like to present a check to you, Mayor. Again, this was a project that you approved the 3 scoreboards at a meeting or so ago. We've been working with Seaboard Foods for the last 3 or 4 months, trying to establish, what priorities they had for doing some donations to the Parks and Rec Department. This is the one we came up with together. We've gotten their scoreboards ready to be ordered, and we'll have them up this spring. Parks Department will put the boards up. But if you guys like to come up with the check and the mayor. And
That'd be good behind you.
Oh,
yeah. Laura, would you use his phone too?
Jack, if you want to have that behind you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Where do you want us?
I think we'll just go right here in front of that big board there. Jack? Chad? You're involved with Parks and Rec, you might as well, we'll get you up here.
So which side do you want me on?
Wherever you will feel comfortable.
Sorry.
Okay, we'll do a couple here.
Let me get a couple. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, hang on, wait.
Oh,
No.
sorry.
Another one with somebody else's camera. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is the consent agenda, which is approval of the minutes of the November 8th and November 16th meetings. We have approval of bills and claims. Under licenses and permits, we have the renewal of a Class C beer permit, Class B native wine permit and Sunday sales for the Carroll Country Store #1. We have renewal of a Class C beer permit with Class B native wine permit and Sunday sales from the Carroll Country Store #2. We have the renewal of a Class C liquor license with outdoor service, Aussie Show Club, Piranha Club. We also have the water system emergency response plan, and then the Northeast Park parking lot improvements. And finally, the fiscal year 2022-2023 budget schedule and council meeting dates for the calendar year 2022. Are there any questions with regards to the consent agenda?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. There's no other discussion. We'll go and vote, please.
Base?
Yes.
Seaman? Yes. Haley?
Yes.
Dirks?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you. The next item is the update from the CADC on the retail coach. And Matt, okay, was Austin's online, okay. Step forward, Matt. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me. Guess not sure how you want the flow of this. I know we got Austin, I believe, online.
Go ahead and start, Matt, with what you got, and
Yeah.
we'll analyze them, pop in.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So right now, we're sitting in a really good spot, finishing up our first year on it. As I'm sure Austin will touch on with
business recruitment, we've expanded the number of businesses that we have made contact with to really start looking at still downtown, whether that's the JCPenney's locations or other things. Getting a lot of interest from businesses, a lot of folks asking questions, wanting to know about the community and what those opportunities are here in Carroll and what Carroll can provide for them. Really no negative feedback for Carroll. So again, for a community of this size of around 10,000 people, we're really standing out on a national basis with national retailers and their interest in coming to Carroll and starting a location here. In terms of business recruitment, we're still taking in data. Sometimes as that comes in, that speeds up. Sometimes it's a little bit slower. It just depends on the data and how fast they're able to get it collected. Still waiting on a few data sets for some of those businesses downtown. But really, we've had a lot of success with that data for existing businesses. We see what's happening at Tree's company. Some of that data, Hallie and then they used for their demand outlook and where they see the demand and the things they sell, whether that's washers, dryers, et cetera. And they saw an opportunity for them to expand. So, we can look at those things and how we're now getting this data, giving it to existing retailers and how they're able to use it to expand and grow their business. It's really been exciting. We see a lot of opportunity and, going into year 2, we only have more opportunity to grow on the success we've already had with a lot of traction this early in the process. So I'm very excited about it. I hope you all are excited about it and what's happened so far. So I guess unless you have any specific questions, I guess I'll leave it up to that, and then anything that Austin may have that you would want to add as well.
Do you see anything coming like in the next 6 months to a year?
I think a lot of that depends. I think Austin will touch on that if he's on. I know that in December here, they go out to a conference, a national retailers conference in Vegas, where they set up meetings individually with those chains, those national retailers, and they have meetings specifically about Carroll, Iowa, and what those opportunities are and bringing them in. So, I know some of that conversation is hopefully moving into a place of getting them here in town, looking at it. They are having some discussions with some other folks on what that looks like in terms of development in the future, what areas of town to develop in for retailers to come to town. So constant conversations are being had. It is all, again, productive, very exciting stuff and no negative stuff. I mean, we have not heard back, no, it's just not for us. I don't like these numbers. They're excited. They see our average household income, that excites them. They see the median age of Carroll being 40, that excites them. They see the clean, safe community, that excites them. So there's a lot of opportunities here in Carroll, and we're really excited about it.
Thanks, Matt. Any questions for?
A quick one.
Yeah.
Matt, thanks for showing up tonight. I'm looking at your October 13th report.
Yes.
And I noticed there are 4 areas that that show promise. And I just wonder if you could explain a little bit about how the process works with, and I don't know if Austin wants to or you want to, what is the process for following up with the people, the businesses that have indicated that their interests? The 4 areas, you have the bullets. They're reviewing sites, needing a franchisee, looking for a site, and site visits. Just what are you doing as a chamber, CADC, working with Austin? What are your roles and what is the process for following up?
So a couple ways I guess I'll approach this for this to make sense. Our role, especially as CADC, is really when they're here and bringing them in here is showcasing Carroll. That's our expertise. We're here, we're from here. We know all about Carroll. I mean, I've been here my entire life, grew up here. So we really showcase Carroll in the best light we can, and then bring that relationship with the city as well for, when that business potentially one day is looking here and what those opportunities are. So how can the city partner with them as well? And working with Mike has been great on that. The other component is when Austin's talking to them, say, medium franchisee, that's really, if we have anyone here local, I guess this will be my shout out and my pitch. So anyone here local in Carroll that wants to be a franchisee owner, let us know and we can hopefully get you in contact with the corporate side of that chain A lot of that though does depend on that corporate business. So that would be whether, if they have franchisee owners currently, say Northwest Iowa, does that franchisee owner, do they want to expand? Do they not want to expand? If they're not, then they're going to need to look for a new franchisee for, say, a Carroll location. So what corporate's telling us when we see that, hey, we like the Carroll market. We think there's possibilities in the Carroll market for us. We just need someone to own and run the franchise. And so that's working with them. What is the corporate side doing on that to make that happen? And, here locally, if we can, try and get that out, if anyone here wants to be that franchisee and has the capability, the capital, all the things that come with that to do that, that's great. So we really work as a team on that front as well. For anyone that's reviewing sites, that's on us to make sure our site information is constantly up to date, showcasing what that is, whether that's a building or maybe that's just the plot, the land site as well, that you could build on. And, those conversations are actually starting to take place on a pretty early basis, so I don't want to get too in the weeds on that. But, what are those sites here we have that we could potentially develop someday and have those national retailers there and really expand and continue to be the hub of West Central Iowa. So it really depends on each thing and where each, retailer would be at and where those conversations are at. Some retailers move fast, some move slow. It just really kind of depends, and it's all really kind of funky still coming out of COVID too at the same time. So the best thing that we have constantly been doing is having open communication and constantly being, if you will, honestly, the cheerleaders of Carroll. And we've been doing a good job. I would say Austin's been doing a great job. We've been doing a good job. We haven't had anyone that has flat out just said, no, this is just not a good community, anything like that. If anyone has said no, it's purely because that, the corporate side of that business, they're just not expanding. And that, frankly, there's more to do on that side of it than us. So.
Okay, so you have had direct conversations with these retailers.
Yeah, through Austin. Austin's really been the lead on that. And that's the benefit of Retail Coach and the commitment you all have made using Retail Coach. I mean, they know the brokers and these retailers on a first name basis. It would be a lot longer and harder conversation for me to have with them just because of that relationship, right? When you're looking to expand and develop, relationships make all the world of difference. And Austin and his team, they've been doing a phenomenal job at that and really painting that picture. And then when we need to come in and be in touch too, we really do that. So it's been working well.
And site visits, any movement on
Sounds
that?
like we're potentially having one next week.
Okay.
So I'll just kind of leave it at that because I don't want to get anyone worked up in the public on it, but it sounds like we potentially have one next week. So
I'm getting a lot of questions from people. What's going on? Are they coming to Carroll? Who's talking with them? I'm glad to hear you're working with Mike. He'll be a part of the equation also.
Yep.
Okay,
For
great.
sure.
Thanks so much.
No
Yeah.
problem.
A long time ago, we set out to find an organization to help us. And their platform that the Retail Coach had, Austin, really stuck out to us. And I'm so glad that we went with these guys. It just seems to be, very positive atmosphere and things are getting done where they had a different technique than all the other ones that we looked at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess I'll say from a CEDC perspective, if I can, they've been phenomenal to work with. I mean, if I have questions, anything, I call Austin. He's a phone call away, he answers, and if he's in a meeting, he gets back to me as soon as possible. And, as I said earlier in my background, I've worked in a lot of different areas, and the one constant is communication. And Austin and his team they've done a fantastic job. Nothing, second to none, I would say. And so it's really been great moving, so far where we're at in this process, and we're really excited, honestly, moving forward. So.
Any other?
Thanks, Matt. Hey, hi, Mayor and Council. I was having some technical issues earlier. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Austin, can you hear us okay?
I can, thank you. Sorry about that. I just wanted to follow up that point and a couple of the questions there. So we're at the point we're at in our process with starting this second year of work and coming up on this additional 12 months for year 2. Really the point that we're at right now is we've gone and actually recruited over 50 and I believe actually over 60 different retailers and restaurants to the market. And so those categories that you mentioned, whether they were interested in the market or need a franchisee or making site visits, we're tracking all of that in a dashboard that we share with CADC that they actually have visibility into, and they can see real time what conversations we're having with those brokers or real estate teams for each of those different retailers and restaurants. And I was telling Matt this the other day. I promise I don't say this to every community, so please don't take it that way. But I've actually been surprised by the amount of interest that we've actually had in Carroll. You're getting a disproportionate amount of interest for the community given your size and position. We don't typically see the level of interest that we've gotten in Carroll in communities that are similar in size or just in market position. So that's a really good sign that shows us that COVID recovery is coming back. Retailers are looking for those markets. It also shows us that there's more opportunity than a lot of these retailers and site selectors have assumed in the past and looking at the market. So we're really encouraged by that. And as we're working through this process and managing those conversations with CADC, the real thing that stands out to us is really the big challenge that we have in getting these retailers to the community. The biggest one is just timing and making sure that we have the right sites for them. So we're working with those real estate teams and those brokers directly when they're interested in the market to either help them find an existing site that works for them that they can get into, or actually helping pair them with a development partner. So one of the things that we're doing in addition to talking to these retailers and restaurants is we're actually working on bringing developers to town as well. So I actually had a conversation today with Matt about one of the developers that we've done some stuff with across the state of Iowa that's interested in potentially being able to build some space that might work for some of these retailers that are interested, that maybe need more square footage than is available right now. And so that's a part of our process as well. And we've been really encouraged by the traction we've got on both of those fronts, especially throughout the recruitment process. We had some early interest and have a lot of interest from those retailers that still want to be in the market, even if there's not a site available for them. So we're having some really interesting conversations on how to get those retailers to the market. And so I think there was a question earlier about, what's the time frame on that? Do we think we'll get somebody in the next 6 months? It's hard to commit to timeframes in this business just because there's so many different stakeholders in that process. But we're really encouraged with where we're at right now. And I think between the conversations that we're having with a lot of these retailers and restaurants, and then on the development side as well, we're pretty confident that we're going to have even more traction than we do right now. And that eventually, maybe within the next 6 to 12 months, that one or two of those may end up in a letter of intent or getting somebody to the market.
Have we told him our increase in our local option sales tax?
I'm not sure.
200-some-thousand, wasn't that it?
I saw some rough figures, but I didn't see the final number.
So the comment was made by Councilmember Dirks on just some of the increases we've had. I mean, originally when we received our report from the Iowa Department of Revenue, our local option sales tax for next fiscal year were projected to go up about 5%. Then with our census growth, we actually seen a modest increase in our population, which was good news for us, a little over 200 people. That increased at about another 2%, so about 7% overall, which is great. Interesting enough, we also just received about a week ago our true-up payment, which is, so the Department of Revenue pays out 95%, or they allocate 95% of the projected revenue from local option sales tax, and then they hold back 5%, where our true-up payment was almost 20%, and it was our largest true-up payment we've ever received here at the city of Carroll of over $232,000. So really some pretty good numbers, and actually some pretty surprising numbers there.
Any other questions for Austin or Matt? Thank you very much, Matt, for coming. Thank you, Austin. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. If I might, I glossed over something I wanted to touch on real quick.
Yeah.
In the next few weeks, Matt mentioned it briefly, but we're actually representing the city at a real estate conference called the International Council of Shopping Centers out in Las Vegas. And it's typically their largest conference of the year. This one is kind of a makeup conference from the one they have in May, but we'll actually be out there meeting with all the retailers and restaurants that we've been trying to recruit to the community, and out there representing the city and making sure that we're putting our best foot forward and having those conversations to try to get them to town. So we'll be following up through CADC with a kind of a debrief on how that conference goes and any momentum or new conversations that we have coming out of that. But it looks like that's going to be pretty promising, just coming out of COVID and all the momentum that we're having. So we'll keep you posted and provide some follow-up info on how that conference goes. But I think a lot of the conversations that we've had that have been trending really well over the past few weeks will kind of come to fruition and continue to either move momentum or help make a decision for some of these retailers and restaurants. So we're excited about that. And, we'll be following up with a status report on how that conference went or any news that comes out of that.
Thank you again, Austin, for the work you guys have been putting into this. I think it's been greatly appreciated and appreciate the update. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
Goodbye. Thanks, Matt. With that, the next item on the agenda is oral requests and communications from the audience. For members of the public wishing to address the council for items that are not on the agenda, they are asked to approach the podium at this time and be recognized. Is there anybody online? Seeing none. The next item is ordinances, and it's the consideration of an ordinance designating certain areas of the city of Carroll, Iowa as an urban revitalization area, the third reading and final adoption. And Mike, please.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is the third reading and final adoption for consideration of an ordinance designating certain areas of the city of Carroll as an urban revitalization. The council's been considering this for some time, beginning back in the summer. And the council did in July 26th of this year hold a meeting and approved a resolution determining necessity and fixing a date for a public hearing on said plan. Public hearing was September 13th. No written or oral comments were received on the plan at that time. The council at that point did adopt the proposed plan at the September 13th meeting. As required by state statute, there is a 30-day period of time where people can submit a request for a second public hearing, and no request was received. And so we're at a point now that we can consider adoption of a of an ordinance adopting the urban renewal areas, urban revitalization areas. The council did hold the first reading of this ordinance at their October 25th meeting, and then held the second reading at their last meeting on November 8th. So as drafted, the plan would extend the urban revitalization areas to July 1st of 2031, unless it's terminated earlier by the council. The plan itself does provide for tax abatement. That tax abatement is an amount of the 100% on the first $75,000 of new value created over a 5-year period. And that would apply to single family and multifamily residential in the city of Carroll. Since the last hearing, council or staff has not received any comments on this at this point. So staff is recommending the mayor and council consider the third reading and final adoption of the ordinance designating certain areas of the city of Carroll, Iowa as an urban revitalization area, and the final adoption of the proposed Carroll urban revitalization area plan. Be happy to answer any questions council has this evening.
Does anyone have any questions for Mike?
I'd move to accept the third reading and final reading.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. If there's no other discussion, we'll go ahead and vote, please.
Base? Yes. Haley?
Yes.
Seaman?
Yes.
Dirks?
Yes.
Fleishner?
Yes. Motion to adopt.
Second.
There's a motion to adopt the plan. If there's no other discussion, we'll go ahead and vote, please.
Dirks?
Yes.
Seaman?
Yes.
Haley?
Yes.
Fleishner?
Yes.
Base? Yes. Ordinance is adopted.
Thank you. Wait till you finish there. The next item we have is under resolutions, and it's the Biokinemetrics Holdings LLC and DMBA Properties and Consulting Incorporated. And Laura, when you're ready, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As a way of a little bit of background on this project, back in December of 2016, the city did enter into a development agreement with Biokinemetrics Holdings and DMBA Properties and Consulting. The agreement required that the developer construct a $17,000 square foot building, along with create 10 new jobs in the building. In exchange, the city would provide a tax increment grant equal to the incremental property tax revenues generated and paid by the developer on that new building over a 15-year period, not to exceed a total grant amount of $300,000. This agreement also provided for a provision that each tax increment grant should be subject to annual appropriation by the city council. So prior to December 1 of each year, during the time that this agreement is in effect, the city council shall consider the question of obligating the funds to the tax increment grant to be collected in the next fiscal year. Annual appropriations is a common language that is in development agreements of this type in Iowa. And without this language, the city will be required to count the total amount of the grant against our debt obligation and constitutional debt limit. While the language allows the current and future councils to choose to not appropriate the funds for the grant in the future without any recourse from the developer, such an action does carry consequences for the city. If the council would choose to not appropriate the funds, the city's bond rating would likely change to junk status. In the end, the city's ability to borrow funds could be affected, and if the city would be able to borrow the funds, then would likely be hammered with a higher interest rate. The developer has completed the construction of the building as required by the agreement. The developer this year has certified the creation of 9 new jobs instead of the required 10. If the developer did fail to create or maintain those minimum number of jobs, the agreement does allow the council to reduce the grant amount by the percentage of the 10 jobs that the developer did not create, in this case, a 10% reduction. The attached resolution to the memo has been prepared to reflect the reduction of that grant amount by 10% for the next fiscal year of 23. This is the 5th year, or this upcoming year would be the 5th year of the annual appropriations, and the remaining grant amount available is $590.68. The recommendation is for council to consider this and approve the resolution obligating the funds from the Central Business District Urban Renewal Tax Revenue Fund for appropriations of the payment of the tax increment grant to Biokinemetrics Holdings and DMBA Properties. Are there any questions on the resolution?
How much longer? Is it 15 years?
It's total 15, and it would be coming up, and this coming up next year's the 5th year.
5th year, okay.
Yep.
Can't remember if it was 10 or 15, okay. Are there any questions for Laura? If not, I need a motion to approve the resolution obligating funds from the Central Business District Urban Renewal Tax Revenue Fund for appropriation of the payment of the tax increment grant to Biokinemetrics Holding LLC and DMBA Properties and Consulting Incorporated for fiscal year 2023.
So moved.
Okay.
There's a motion and a second. There's no other discussion. We'll go and vote, please.
Haley?
Yes.
Dirk?
Yes.
Hayes? Yes. Fleshner?
Yes.
Seaman? Resolution is approved.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the Tyler Technologies Encode software upgrade. And Laura, when you're ready, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So there are a couple of things that the city staff is looking for some discussion with council on relating to our current software. This discussion started because our server is due to be replaced next summer. And just due to timing, it takes a while to get some things in place. So we wanted to start the discussion now. So currently we host and contain all of our financial software here on a server here in City Hall. Tyler, our software company, does offer the ability to host that software and our data for us or go into the cloud to have this hosting services. There are a number of reasons why we would consider this moving to this hosted environment. First, Tyler can offer more security to protect the data than what the city currently has. They've been offering this service for over 20 years, and in fact, one of the representatives did tell me that they had about 220 of their clients switched from in-house data to go to Tyler's hosting security due to those entities having malware attacks last year. Second, Tyler's hosted environment is tested and audited every year. It is monitored for any type of suspicious activity, and in the case of a data breach, Tyler would notify the city immediately and necessary actions would have to be taken. Tyler was not aware of any data breach to date. Third, the hosted environment contains 2 backups of the city's data at different geographic locations in the United States. One is in the northeast part of the United States and one is in the southern part of the United States. This just adds to that peace of mind that the data is being protected and couldn't be wiped out with one type of attack, either a terrorism attack or natural disaster, because you're geographically separated. And finally, we would need all we need to be operational is a computer and internet service. So if there was a case where we had another pandemic or natural disaster, we could be up and going within a 24-hour period. Instead of having to wait for if our data was wiped out in the server, we'd have to find a server box, get it up and going, and then we could get the data from a backup going. But by going to the hosted, as long as we had computer, internet connection, we could be up and going in a less than 24-hour period. So that's the information on the hosting services. Before I move on to talk about the other piece of this, I'd be willing to answer questions that council has about the potential of moving to a hosted environment.
We moved to a hosted environment several years ago at my business, and it's been a very good thing. The access from any point is huge. You know, if you're traveling or if you have to be at home, like we had with pandemic it's great to be able to just have a computer and connect and have your data at your fingertips and be able to operate. I think that combined with the fact that we have very, very solid internet services here in Carroll is key.
If you were to access it from home, like, say you're at home or Mike's at home, Greg's at home, does that require a secure VPN where they log in at?
Our connection that we would have just to get into the software would be secure no matter where you were.
No matter where you are.
Yeah,
okay.
because due to just your login process, that
So you
would be
connect.
secure. Yep.
It goes right into through your Wi-Fi and then on. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, we would work with them and they would advise us or tell us how to get that all set up so that it was definitely, no matter where you were, it was a secure connection into the software.
Well, just, if you're in a hotel room, there's no VPN there unless your computer has one that can connect
Right.
directly to like Tyler Technologies. You'd want that on whatever computer you wanted to access it from. So
Yep.
they would set that all up.
And
for
it
us.
still has to access through client software, so it's not like you're opening up a web browser and able to
Correct.
access this data. So whatever computer you go through still has to have that client software.
Okay. How many would you buy? Like one for you, one for Laura, a spare one? Do you have any idea about? So that you have those individual computers?
It's any computer.
You can do any computer from that, okay.
Yes.
So my office I gotta have a computer from my office and do it that way, because it has the client software on it.
Right, and we would put that on any computer
You can
that,
put it on anyone.
Yep.
You have, okay.
I mean, we have probably 12, 15 people in the city organization that has this software
Okay.
on their computer.
So it's
And
already
if
there.
some like Chief Burke has it, well, this actually would be a better connection, because we're connecting to the cloud now versus trying to get back to city hall.
Through here over to City Hall, okay.
The companies that have been hacked are going to the cloud.
yes. And we don't have full-time IT staff to be monitoring
Right.
what's going on
We had
and
that
trying to get
discussion.
into our server. And so this would give us a little bit more peace of mind that they've got the security software, probably software plus, IT staff that is monitoring and watching that on a 24/7, 365 basis.
all that. And if our, pardon me, if our server on site here crashes, now we're going through a recovery process with the backup to bring it back up, whereas they'll have multiple copies on their servers. It'll just be
Yep.
seamless.
Any other questions on the hosting services?
Well, the financial numbers are almost the same, aren't they, Mike? I'm not quite understanding all of them. If we stayed with what we have, what is it gonna be the cost of that compared to this?
Okay. So there is a little bit of an increased cost by going to the cloud compared to the annual maintenance that we do pay for right now. The annual maintenance that we have right now, we don't include, or we don't currently have their services. They do offer what's called the disaster recovery service, which they would do a backup. I think it's nightly, but I'm not 100% sure. And then they would help you get up and going if you had a natural disaster. But you would still, obviously, if you had if you were hosting in-house, you'd still have to get the server up and going and get it ready for them to then help get that data back on the server for you. So there's still a little bit of time there involved if we kept it in-house. Yes, that is a little bit cheaper right now, if you look on a year-to-year basis, a year-over-year, 1 year at each time. Because that dollar amount is just over 30,000 when you add the annual maintenance and the disaster recovery, where the quoted amount for going to the cloud, the hosted option is 41,509. And that does include your annual maintenance, plus they would keep all your software up to date, and they're giving you that disaster recovery service and watching for the attacks and things like that. There is, what was included in your packet was a 5-year comparison of the data, that if we kept it in-house, we'd have to get, regardless, we're gonna have to replace our server. It's just a matter of what size of server do we replace? And some of that then will fold in here to our next discussion, is city staff would really like to consider upgrading our software to what we're currently on, version 9 to version 10. Version 10 is a little bit more, quite a bit more robust system that will be able to do a lot better reporting of some of our financial data. Plus the end users have a lot better experience using the data. We did talk to a number of other clients who do use the software, not only other cities here in the state of Iowa that have done the conversion, and Carroll County, they are on version 10. All the comments were favorable. Everybody really likes it. One of them even said, I wish I would have switched sooner, just because of the information that they can get out of the system. I can't give you specifics on what that is, because we haven't worked with it, but enough to know much about it. But if we would move to the version 10 software, it's a what do you want to call it, more robust system that we would need to add actually a second server. So instead of having one server, you'd have to have 2 servers. So the cost of servers, just that cost goes up quite a bit. Where if we move to the cloud version 10, we can have a little bit smaller server in-house that would have just our files that we need to share here in the office, between our Word and Excel files and things like that. So when you do that cost comparison of keeping it in-house, 2 servers versus going to the cloud with only 1 server over a 5-year period, there is a little bit of more, it is slightly more expensive, actually going to the hosted by just about $16,000. However, we don't have full-time IT staff to be maintaining and watching over the data. Once again, another reason why we really consider and want to go to the hosted environment.
So for $3,200 a year, to me, it's a no-brainer, for all the protection.
Yeah, I agree.
My only comment too is gonna be that $16,000, that does not include any IT costs with our consultant actually install and set up the server here.
That eat up that $3,200.
And so that's gonna eat up some of that cost. Correct.
Right, yeah, I did not include any install fees, because I don't know what they're gonna be. And the server cost, pretty rough estimates. I don't have a good number on those. I'm in the ballpark with the numbers, but we were still going back and forth with Tyler on what kind of specification requirements we need with the server. So I feel I'm pretty close. Obviously, as time goes on and depending on how council wants to move on this, we'll definitely get firm numbers and have to come back and get approval for the server purchase.
Still less expensive than hiring an IT guy and paying another salaried individual, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Get hacked once.
Mm-hmm.
And for them to lock in the price for 3 years is great.
So once again, timing, this is all come about because of timing that our server needs to be replaced next summer. If we would move to the hosted environment, go to the cloud, that process, Tyler tells me, takes about 2 to 3 months. So we could get going on that at any time. I might wait till we get the budget kind of put together and then we'll make that move.
Yeah.
And then the migration to version 10 actually takes quite some time. They're telling us anywhere from 12 to 18 months from start to finish. Because there's quite a bit that goes into basically getting everything set up. I know talking with a couple of the other communities, you do spend quite a bit of time of really defining the roles of the individuals that are going to be working in the software and making sure that they have access to the things and to only the things that they need access to. So it's a good time to review some of that stuff as well.
Laura, when you switch to the newer version, the more robust version, is there a lot of training that will be needed to?
There will be, yes.
Okay.
Yes, because it's gonna look quite a bit different.
Okay.
There's gonna be, the look will be really quite a bit different, however, the functionality is gonna be the same. There will be training, they'll be able to, I don't believe they send anybody on site to do training, I don't think, but don't quote me on that, I didn't get into that. But they can do a lot of the stuff remote these days.
Is that training boiled into these prices, or will that be above and beyond?
I'm not sure about the training time. I think yes, to train if it's remote, it's all built in, but if for some reason we would request that we want somebody here, then travel costs would be on top of this.
Sure. Figure for more than what you plan on. It's a tough deal to move systems.
Okay.
You're
Yeah,
doing the same.
I did not move since I've been here or whatever. The system that we have is the system that's been placed since I've been working here.
Give it a decade after you implement it, everybody will be happy by then.
I laugh, but I'm sure that's right.
I wish I was kidding.
Mine wasn't that hard.
What's that?
Mine wasn't that hard.
Hers isn't that hard. I'm gonna listen to Misty, then I'll hear
Go
you
with
play.
Any other questions for Laura? I get there's 2 resolutions that need to be approved. The first one is a resolution to accept a sales quotation from Tyler Technologies for hosting services in the amount of $41,509 for 3 years and then subject to adjustment by Tyler Technologies.
So, second.
There's a motion and a second. If there's no other discussion, we'll go ahead and vote, please.
Seaman? Yes. Dirks?
Yes.
Haley?
Yes.
Bates?
Yes.
Fleshner?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
And the second resolution is to accept the sales quotation from Tyler Technologies to migrate Encode 9 to VX for the quoted amount of $43,320.
So moved. Second.
There's a motion and a second. There's no other discussion. We'll go ahead and vote, please.
Bates?
Yes.
Dirks?
Yes.
Haley?
Yes.
Seaman?
Yes.
Fleshner?
Yes.
Resolution is approved.
Thank you. Choose that one. The next item on the agenda is reports. And the first item is the downtown streetscape phase 10. And Randy, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. During the construction of the phase 10 of the streetscape, there were a few items of work that were encountered that needed to be taken care of outside of the contract, but they needed to be accomplished so that the contract work could continue. We've included 4 of those items in a change order number 2 for the project. Just briefly, they include a repair of some landscaping over here on West 7th Street, the deletion of a street light on West 7th Street, some additional demolition and electrical work on Main Street between 4th and 5th, and also the relocation of an electrical service on East 7th Street. The total cost of those is, or the net cost, is $19,511.44. And that brings the total contract price to $1,076,937.91. There's no extension of time in this change order proposed. As you recall, this contract is a unit price contract. So the contractor will actually be paid on the work that's completed and not necessarily the lump sum or what's now the current contract price. So unless there are any questions, I'd recommend your consideration of approval of change order number 2 to the Phase 10 project in the amount of $19,511.44.
Have all these been completed already?
Yes, they have.
They're all completed, okay.
Mhm.
Are there any other questions for Randy? If not, I will look for a motion for approval of change order number 2 to the downtown streetscape Phase 10 project in the amount of $19,511.44.
So moved.
There's a motion and a second. There's no other discussion. We'll go and vote, please.
Hayes,
Yes.
Haley,
Yes.
Fleshner,
Yes.
Seaman,
Yes.
Dirks.
Yes.
Motion's approved.
Thank you. The next item on under reports is the 2021 redistricting of City of Carroll Council wards. And Mike, please.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. With the completion of the 2020 census and now the recently adopted redistricting for the state of Iowa, the City of Carroll needs to consider redistricting for the City of Carroll. With our 2020 population of 10,321, with 4 wards, the ideal ward population for the city is 2,580 people in each ward. And the Iowa Administrative Code does set a maximum allowable variance for each ward at 0.1%. And this maximum variation for the City of Carroll would be 258 people, which would permit a population range between 2,322 and 2,838. Now, while the Iowa Code does allow a maximum allowable variation, guidance from the Iowa Secretary of State does provide that ward population must be as close as possible to the ideal ward population unless it's necessary to deviate in order to comply with other standards in Iowa Code. Now, City of Carroll did send this report to the county auditor for question and comments, and she did offer the observation that while it's city's discretion regarding the ward population numbers, when individuals are moved between wards, it seems to cause a lot of confusion when it comes time to vote. So I think she did exercise caution. So here overall is the current ward boundaries. And let's go to I'm going to zoom in kind of the central area where the 4 wards come together. So this is what I would call option A, which this is our current ward maps and the populations within them. Ward 1 would have a variation of 73 people below the ideal ward population. Ward 2 would be 7 people below the ideal ward population. Ward 3 is 6 people below the ideal ward population. And Ward 4 is 87 people above the ideal ward population. So these are within the maximum allowable tolerances laid out in state code. So in theory, if council does not want to or does not wish to make a change, this option A would be permissible. Going to the next drawing, if we took an area which would move 1 block from Ward 4 to Ward 1, which this would be the area between North Grant Road, Parkview Drive, Vine Street, and East 11th Street, moving that from Ward 4 to Ward 1, that would make the variances in Ward 1 to be 30 people below the ideal ward population, and Ward 4 would be 44 people above the ideal ward population. This would also arguably make a more uniform boundary for Ward 1 and Ward 4. Option C would be bringing an additional block from Ward 4 to Ward 1. And this is a block that would be bounded by North Grant Road, West 12th Street, North Clark Street, and East 11th Street. Now, this would be arguably a less uniform boundary, but I would note there are certainly irregular boundaries in our current ward maps. Now, this variance would make Ward 1 would have 12 people above the ideal ward population, and Ward 4 would be 2 people above the ideal ward population. A fourth option, option D, which we didn't develop any additional options. If the council finds it unacceptable and wants a more ideal ward makeup, the council could look at other options, but those would likely require a pretty substantial redrawing of the ward boundaries within the city of Carroll. I would note that any changes to the ward boundaries would only affect elections that happen in the future. Any council member that is elected now or was elected would be unaffected by these changes going forward.
So it wouldn't take effect until they actually came up for re-election?
Correct.
Okay.
So Ward 2 and 4 would occur next election, and then Ward 1 and 4 would be 4 years from now. So with the timeline, the city needs to adopt, we have a 60-day requirement from when the legislative redistricting was completed by the state on November 4th. So that is January 3rd. So from the timeline, the city does need to begin action to take some type of action of either no change under option A or other changes under the other 3 options presented. So we would request tonight that you provide staff on how to proceed on what option, and then make a motion this evening setting a public hearing on the revised City of Carroll ward maps for December 13th of 2021. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions council has this evening.
Do you know when the last time was we maybe had to do this?
10 years. So this occurs
10
every
years.
10 years
that's
with
right,
the
yeah.
census.
I knew that.
Is there a change every 10 years?
There has, I mean, there can be, and certainly 10 years ago, there were some pretty modest changes made to the ward maps.
Almost every 10 years or saying this happens.
Correct.
And 10 years ago, I think the only change we had was this part up here around Perch and Bass, that fishbowl area. That was moved out of Ward 2 and Ward 1.
Actually, I think it was the block to the west was moved out of Ward 1 and put into Ward 2.
Oh, that's right here?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe that's what it was. But I know it was that area.
Yeah, it was very small change.
I'll just throw this out. When I was looking at these, to me, I think the ideal is to get as less variation as possible, which to me puts option C at the top part, and then maybe option B is the second one. But you don't want to get so skewed out of population that you make big changes. I mean, if we're still okay, I mean, I'd be fine with leaving it too, I guess.
I think a lot of people initially don't, I don't know, from going door to door over the years, they're not sure what ward they're in. So I think
Yeah.
whatever other approach we want to use is fine. They figure it out and it'll be fine.
For years, I think it was in the back of the phone book. There was a map of Carroll with all the wards in it. I don't even know. I don't think I even have a phone book in the house anymore.
For most people anymore, it's just a click of the
Computer.
Right.
Figure it out, so.
Right.
But
Now it's really hard to note, but I do have to note this just for comic relief right now. if you look really closely on Main Street between wards 3 and 4, there are 3 people that live in the median of Main Street. So I'm not sure, I haven't found their house yet, but that's what the census is claiming. So
I think it's a little wonky right down there.
that'll be the headline in the paper tomorrow. 3 people living in the median. Because
If you were in Los Angeles, it'd be like 500 people. Right.
On this map, you really can't see it, but it like when you zoom in the system that we use to look at this, there's 3 people living there.
Can we, if there's a radical change in the next 10 years, can we change this at any time?
So if the city would have to do a special census, that would
It has to be based on a census.
It has to be based on a census.
Okay.
And I would tell you, if we had a population growth of like 1,000 people in the next 5 years, and we felt comfortable that there was that big of a population change, you would want to do a special census.
We've done it before.
Yeah. Because 200 plus people in Carroll for us over the next 10 years in road use taxes alone is $250,000 for the next decade. So it does end up being real dollars.
I think Carolyn's right. I think most people get a little confused on where they're at to begin with and search it out and get to where they need to vote. I would believe that option C would be the best in my opinion, just to keep it as even as possible.
I have no problem with it.
So that's really our only question, is how close do you want to get it?
Yeah, how close do you want
We're not worried
variation?
about
Yeah.
the logistics of it.
If we're gonna change it, we just won't get as close as we can.
Right. Either one is fine with me, but just the notation in here that for C creates a more uniform boundary versus, or pardon me, B creates the more uniform.
B is more uniform
More
boundary.
uniform.
Yeah.
But, and C is less uniform, so I.
It's like Mike said, we're right on.
It's close, it's close.
That's what I was looking at. I
Ours now
don't,
is
C or B, it made no
81.
difference to me. If you want to go by variation, C is the best. If you want to go by a boundary,
Yeah,
then B is probably the best. But
either
when
one.
I look at the 3 of the difference, I think A, we could, with the other 2 choices, I think one or the other there. But I think I would get away from A. A gets better, or B gets better variation than A does. So,
I think if you're trying to do it for variation, you should probably go C.
correct.
Right.
Yeah.
You need a formal motion?
Yes, please.
Okay, I would move to direct staff to proceed with option C and set public hearing on the revised City of Carroll ward maps for December 13th, 2021.
I'll second that.
There's a motion and a second. If there's no other discussion, we'll go ahead and vote, please.
Dirks,
Yes.
Fleischner,
Yes.
Haley,
Yes.
Seaman,
Yes.
Space.
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you. I trust everyone's read the committee reports that were contained in the packet. I have no comments this evening. Are there any comments from the city council? Nope.
No.
Any comments from the city manager?
None this evening.
None this evening. Then our next item is the work session with Adams Street Reconstruction. And Randy, when you're ready, you up for that or was?
I can introduce it.
Okay.
Tonight, we'll be talking a little bit about the Adams Street reconstruction. We have invited Christine Stone from Allers and Cooney to make a presentation to you on special assessment, one of the mechanisms for funding the project. Christine is here.
Okay. Hey, Christine. You can come on up and
Sure.
to the podium here and
We've also have on virtually Terry Lutz with McClure Engineering.
got that,
He will
okay.
also provide some information on special assessment from his firm's perspective and their experience. And we have here in person Cody Forge with McClure Engineering, project manager on our Adam Street reconstruction project.
Okay.
So if you would like to proceed.
You just, oh, she has a stick there, Laura. There's also, if you have like stuff in your book, there's a camera above you and there's probably a dot in the middle. And so you can center whatever, if we need to do something live there overhead, you can set it over the dot. We can get the camera up above too, so whatever works for you. Thanks for coming, Christine. Appreciate your
Thank
time.
you for having me. So while she's bringing that up, just a little bit of introduction. My name is Christine Stone. I'm a shareholder at the Allers firm in Des Moines. I've been there about 4.5 years. Before that, I was an in-house city attorney and an assistant before that. So I've been practicing in municipal law for 12 plus years now. I'm sort of a generalist. I do special assessment work, public improvement contracting, some litigation, and kind of the purpose of the discussion tonight is just a general overview of the special assessment process. I understand the city has used it before, but it's been quite some time, so just kind of a refresher on what it looks like and things to keep in mind.
And I would note, we use Ms. Stone most recently with the Mid-American Energy Franchise Agreement
Yes.
update we did. So.
That's right.
On the two big ones. Oh, there it goes. Thank you.
Can I advance the slides or do I just mention it? Okay. Yeah, okay, you can keep going. So just the initial slides obviously are the sort of disclaimers. Tonight is just a general overview. And every situation is different and you should always seek specific legal advice if you have specific legal questions. But just kind of starting out, what are special assessments? Special assessments basically are one method of paying for a city project. The special assessment section of Chapter 384, which is the municipal finance chapter, and it has its own whole division of that chapter. Division 4 gives you the very specific process that you have to follow when you're adopting special assessments. So essentially, a certain portion of the project costs are assessed against the properties that abut to your project. And the understanding is sort of that, those who are most benefited by the project should share their proportional cost of that project. The special assessments are paid back once the project is completed, so the city still does have to sort of finance the project on the front end, but then the special assessments are paid at the end of the project and they're payable over time. And they are collected by the county with property taxes. So there's, you file your special assessments with the county treasurer and then they're collected through the normal tax collection process.
Are they apportioned equally, or can you apportion each property a certain percentage?
We'll kind of get into the
sorry.
specifics of that, but yes, it varies how you
Okay.
sort of apportion the project. So we can go to the next slide. So, like I said, the underlying principle is that an assessment should be less than or equal to the special benefits that are conferred upon the property by the nearby improvements that the city has made. Hit it again, I think. Yeah. So in practice, the application of this principle can be somewhat difficult. One more time. Go ahead. So the concept of benefit is somewhat difficult to ascertain. The Iowa courts have said that there's no sort of magic formula that you impose. You really have to consider the specifics of your project and the properties that abut your project in determining what that local benefit is to each individual property. And then you also have to, anytime, obviously, a special assessment is treated similar to a tax. So anytime that you're imposing a tax on anyone, you have to follow due process and people have to be notified about that. This is some language from the Iowa Supreme Court that just sort of, points out that, very few property owners request to be assessed. Usually it's something that they have not themselves asked for. So there always is, the risk of legal challenges when you impose special assessments. The courts have said, that each assessment against a specific property cannot exceed the special benefits that are conferred on that property. So sort of the preliminary way that you think about a special assessment project is you have to consider the general benefits of the project. So how much of the project is improving and benefiting the community at large, and then what share of the project is really benefiting the folks who are closest to the project. If, for those benefits that directly touch sort of those abutting properties, they can be assessed for that amount. So again, the Iowa Code Chapter 384 allows for special assessments. However, those assessments can't exceed the special benefit. And the code also says that special assessments cannot exceed 25% of the valuation of the property. So at the outset, the council has to make a determination about the lot valuations within the special assessment district, and then you are sort of capped at that 25% amount. Sometimes a special assessment will exceed the 25% cap. And in those situations, you can show that sort of excess amount as what's called a deficiency fund. That gets reported to the county. That sort of sits there unless and until the property is improved. And if the property is improved within the special assessment repayment period, there is the option for the council to try to capture then some of that deficiency. But that sort of falls off once your repayment period is over. Yeah, you can bump it a couple times. So one, very common special assessment project are street paving projects. Usually when you're reconstructing a street, or if you're paving a gravel street for the first time, there's usually both general and specific benefits from the project. The abutting property owners are not required to pay for the general benefits. They really can only be assessed for the special benefits that are conferred on them. So, if they are asked to pay too much, and if they're really supporting the general benefit, they're sort of subsidizing the community at large. So you want to avoid that. The code gives you sort of a laundry list of the types of improvements that you can pay for by special assessment. It includes sewers, drainage conduits, streets, street lighting, pumping stations, and sewage disposal and treatment plants, and many others. In addition to the actual construction costs, you can build in your engineering and legal fees into your special assessment. And you can also include a default fund of up to 10% of the assessable costs. So that's intended to cover, anyone who doesn't pay their assessments. It's kind of like a cushion that you build in. And then the code does allow you to do that, but you have to make that decision at the front end of your project. For private property that abuts your project, if you are going to be doing private utility connections as part of the project, so if you're replacing the sewer or water main and you want to include those connections in your project, you can also include those within the special assessment, and those can be assessed against the adjacent property up to their full amount. So you don't have to follow that 25% cap for those types of improvements, because those clearly are benefiting that property. There are two ways that you can initiate a special assessment. One is through council action, sort of without the property owners being involved. And then the second is a petition and waiver process, which is where the property owners essentially consent to the special assessment. And so the petition and waiver process, the code contemplates that the property owners would essentially come to the city and say, hey, we want our street to be improved. We're willing to be assessed for it. We'll sign written agreements that essentially state that, we agree to it, we waive the 25% cap, we waive some of the notice provisions that are required by the code, and we just agree to be assessed so that we can get this project done. So it's, I call it special assessment by consent, or voluntary special assessment is another way to describe it. Sometimes you might get developers who propose this to the city if they're planning on subdividing property and know that they're gonna have to put in a turn lane or something like that. This might be one way of addressing that too, is the voluntary assessment. And then the second way is if the council initiates a special assessment project on its own, and that is without the property owner's consent. Essentially, the council has to arrange for engineering services at the outset. The engineers prepare plats and schedules, which basically shows the project, estimates the cost. There's some preliminary plans and specifications, and then they're engaged to supervise the construction of the project as it moves along. Special assessments are imposed in what I call kind of a two-step process. So you have your process before you initiate construction, and then you have your council process once the project construction is completed. So at the outset, before you let the project, the council has to adopt a preliminary plat and schedule that shows the assessment, shows the project subject to assessment, shows the district of the where you plan to make the assessments. And then you also have to adopt what's called a resolution of necessity. And then you let your project, you bid the work, construction commences, and then once the project is completed, you adopt a final plat and schedule, and that's what essentially levies the assessments on the properties. So what types of properties are subject to assessment? It's all property, public and private, which receives a benefit from the project can be assessed, except for highways and streets, so you always carve those out, and any property owned by the federal government. So you cannot assess those properties, but you can assess, sort of your non-taxable properties, so schools, churches, county and state lands can also be subject to assessment. And also railroad property. So the city council is tasked with sort of determining what property to assess and the amount of the assessments. Obviously, your project engineer helps a lot with that. You will instruct the engineer as to the boundary of the district. So there's a process that the Iowa courts have recognized, what's called the Flint formula. Some engineers will base their assessments on that. It's a mathematical formula that considers sort of the frontage on the project as well as a certain depth back, and then sort of calculates the benefit based on that. But you shouldn't just use a mathematical formula alone. You also need to consider, the specific project that you're working on, the specific properties involved. Sometimes if you have like a corner lot that's got two frontages, you might want to make adjustments for that so that they're not assessed, a greater burden than their neighbor. If it's a large lot, you might want to make some adjustments for that to make sure that they're also not sort of being overly assessed.
Did you say Flint formula?
Yes.
Okay, I thought I heard that right. Okay, thanks.
And then in addition, it's also up to the council to determine, how much of the project costs are going to be assessed on the neighboring properties. Some communities will say, we're only going to assess the paving costs and everything else the city's going to pay for. Some might say it'll be only paving plus storm sewer. Some might assess some portion of the entire project. It's really kind of up to you to make that decision about, what percentage of this project is really benefiting the local folks who are abutting the project versus what percentage of the project is benefiting the entire community. I talked about sort of that 25% cap on special assessments. So at the outset, the city council has to determine what the lot valuations are that are reflected in your special assessment plat and schedule. And the valuation according to the Iowa code has to equal the present fair market value of the property with the proposed improvements completed. I would say most communities just use the assessor's valuation. So you go to your, property records with your assessor's office, and that's kind of a neutral third party, who's made that determination. So it takes some of the pressure off the council. Or the code does say that you can appoint a committee of 3 people who are skilled in the knowledge of real estate to appraise the properties that are within your special assessment district. I've never had anybody, use that process. Like I said, it's usually the assessor's property values that most people use. So the valuation that the city council establishes in the special assessment plat and schedule does not affect somebody's property taxes. It doesn't affect the overall assessment value, except it might affect that 25% cap. All council meetings where special assessments are being considered are open to the public. A public hearing is required to be held before the adoption of the resolution of necessity. There's kind of some goofy notice requirements within the special assessment section of the code. You actually have to publish notice to each of the property owners subject to assessment at least 15 days prior to the public hearing date.
That answers one of the questions.
And after adoption of the resolution of necessity, the city, like I said, moves forward with bidding the project and awarding a contract. One thing to note is the resolution of necessity does require a 3/4 approval vote, so it's sort of a higher standard of approval when you're voting on that. There is the possibility that a remonstrance can be filed by the neighbors who are subject to assessment. And if you receive one of those, then it's unanimous approval is required. But it's a very high threshold. It has to be 75% of the value of the assessments have to be included within the remonstrance. And then once you approve your resolution of necessity, your preliminary plat schedule is filed with the county. And that essentially puts everyone on notice. So if property changes hands while the project is being constructed, the subsequent owner of that property is still subject to those assessments because you filed your paperwork with the county. So assessments are due and payable only after the project is complete and the council has accepted the project and adopted a final plat and schedule reflecting the actual construction cost of the project. So, your preliminary plat and schedule is prepared by your engineer based on cost estimates and what they think the project is going to cost. But once your project is complete and you have your final construction costs, you sort of refill in the tables based on those numbers, and those are your final assessment figures. Your final assessments cannot exceed the preliminary assessments. So once you notify property owners of what their preliminary assessment amount is, if your project comes in over budget and for whatever reason, it ends up being higher than what you estimated, those are capped at what the preliminary assessment figures were. Once you've approved your final plat and schedule, you also have to publish and mail notice again. And then the final documents again are filed with the county for collection. In your final resolution, which levies the assessments, the council will describe the length of repayment. So you can, for any assessments that are greater than $500, you can say that they're payable over a period of years, not to exceed 15. Some communities use 10, some use 15. That's really up to you. You also can specify the interest rate that's imposed on special assessments. It can't exceed 9% is the current number. That does fluctuate a little bit. Some communities will use like their bonding interest rate. They'll say, well, that's what the city has to pay on the financing, so we're going to pass that on, to the property owners. Some use the full maximum because they want to encourage early payments. So that's really kind of a policy decision by you folks, what sort of interest rate you want to impose.
Do you have cities that don't impose interest rates?
I don't think I have. The code says you have, interest must be $1.
Oh,
So
okay.
it can't be less than one.
There's some specificity.
Yeah, but you have a lot of flexibility, you know, beyond
So you have a
that.
minimum of $1.
Yeah. Or up to 9%. I would say most commonly, probably the communities that I work with, it's the bond interest rate is what they'll use. And once you've levied your final assessments, they can be paid within 30 days without interest. Otherwise, after that 30-day period, then interest will start to accrue because they're not, you know, able to pay it until the next sort of tax bills go out.
So can you offer a special?
Technically, how that would work, because you're levying the assessments with the interest rate imposed, and you have to report to the county after that 30-day period what the amounts are. Yeah, there's not really an option that's built in.
I'm assuming if the cost goes over the.
I'm curious, you had mentioned before there's that 25% limit, and then you mentioned the value of the land. Is it the total value of that property, or is it just the land on that property less dwellings that is assessed?
It would be the total valuation that's shown on the assessor's record, so it'd be land plus any improvements on the property.
Thank you.
If the assessment installments are not paid when they're due, they are subject to collection with penalty, the same as any delinquent property taxes, and they are considered a lien on the property, so they will follow the property if any subsequent transfers occur. There are, from time to time, legal challenges for special assessment projects. What the cases tell us is that the city council's determination that property will be specially benefited by an improvement is conclusive. And courts have traditionally presumed that the amount of the city's assessment is correct and is somewhat deferential. But in more recent cases, that hasn't always been the case. So there was the city of Indianola challenged some assessments. I think that was back in like 2011. Or the property owners in Indianola challenged an assessment that was imposed by the city, and similarly in Urbandale. In both of those cases, the assessments were quite high.
Wow.
And so, you know, I think some of that was just the sticker shock that people had, and so obviously they were motivated to challenge them.
Do those challenges have to be resolved before the project can go on?
So there's an opportunity for them to challenge at the beginning when you're doing your preliminary plat and schedule, and then there's also an opportunity at the end. But if a challenge is filed, it doesn't stop the project. It essentially just asks the court to look at their assessment amount and make a determination of whether it's, you know, correct and reflects the benefits on the property or whether it's excessive.
Because the city pays for it up front and collects it at the end anyway, so.
Right. So it only affects their individual
then-
assessment
okay.
and the dollar amount they would have to pay.
Okay.
Does it take very many people to challenge it or just one?
It can just be one. It can just be one property owner that thinks that they've been assessed too much and they can file a legal challenge. So the burden is on any protesting property owner to show that their assessment is excessive. And so they would have to bring some sort of proof to show, you know, what the actual benefit is to them and why the city's assessment is too high. In the absence of such evidence, the assessment will stand. And if the property owner carries his burden, the remedy is the court would reduce that person's special assessment. And so I think that was my sort of legal overview, but I don't know if any of the engineering folks have sort of real life issues to bring up. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'll stick around. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Christine.
I think Terry Lutz with McClure was going to make a few statements, excuse me, based on his experience, and he's on now.
Yeah, hi. Good evening. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, Terry, you're coming.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, Mike, I didn't know if you wanted to kick it off or just want me to jump in or.
Yeah, go ahead, Terry.
Okay, I'm having just a little bit of a hard time hearing you, so if everybody could speak up. Yeah, first of all, I wish I was there in person. Cody's there representing our firm, and I wanted to say, first of all, how excited we are to be a part of Carroll. And we had a nice ribbon cutting the other day and met several of you. Had a conversation with Mike at our discussion, or at our ribbon cutting, and probably led to me being on the call tonight. But as I understand it, you guys are getting ready to embark on maybe a long-range street improvement program for the city. And one of the conversation Mike and I were having, and with Randy today even, is, our assessments something you guys want to tackle. And first of all, let me introduce myself. I guess I should have started there. My name's Terry Lutz. I'm CEO of McClure. I'm a civil engineer. I've been in practice for about 40 some years and have got a lot of experience with different cities of different sizes doing assessments. And they can be very difficult politically. They're challenging, particularly if you're in a community such as Carroll that have never done it before. By the way, I also served as mayor of Fort Dodge for 4 years from 2006 through 2009. I ran as a one-term mayor and kept my promise after my term. I lived in Fort Dodge for about 30 years, and after that I moved to Des Moines, where I've been for about 11 years and have been running our firm from there. So I'd really like to have a dialogue, if we could, about, assessments. And it kind of starts with, why would you consider doing assessments? And because politically they can be challenging, but from a financial standpoint, there's a real, maybe a driving reason behind it is really kind of an issue of fairness. When you take on a public improvement project like a city street, oftentimes there are related types of work that get done as part of the project, such as fixing a driveway approach that is privately owned, maybe fixing a water service line from the main to the property line that typically is privately owned, or a sanitary sewer line, or a sidewalk. If you can think of a sidewalk in front of a person's house, if that's in bad shape, and you replace that or a portion of it with public money as part of a street project, is it fair that the public pays for that driveway or sidewalk or that personal private property line with public funds when other properties in the city are not paying or not getting their private issue paid for? So that's kind of the theory behind assessments. It really just, as you've looked at this already, it takes the cost of those improvements that are providing specific benefit to a property and assigns those costs to that property. There are a million different ways in which to do that, and essentially the code allows the city council and the city engineer and their attorney to work together to come up with the assessment methodology that can be applied. So it's left up to the discretion of that group, and as long as it's fairly and consistently applied and equitable, the courts have upheld that the assessment methodology is correct. We've done these on street projects. We've done them in county drainage projects. They've stood the test of courts for years, but they are, again, politically difficult oftentimes. Now, in addition to the fairness issue, the other reason that a lot of communities will look at assessments, particularly smaller communities, is because the way you can legally pay for streets is really somewhat constricted for cities. You typically have general obligation bonds that you can issue. Cities are limited to the amount of general obligation debt they can have. And so when you start assessing private property owners for a portion of the project, it allows the city to leverage public dollars with private dollars. And typically then you can do more work publicly and leverage city dollars to do that. So that's the other reason it makes sense. That's the advantage of doing assessments. Again, the biggest disadvantage is the political aspect of getting the public to recognize the fact that there are private property benefits from doing a public improvement. So when I first got in business years ago, we used these quite often. It seemed like it was a much stronger practice in communities to assess the private property owners for public improvements. I've noticed probably the last 20 years it's become more difficult. I don't know if that's because just a general lack of trust of public officials today or why, but they are more difficult. So what we have done as a firm when cities want to take these on, particularly if they're going to start something new and try to develop new policies, we encourage a pretty robust workshop setting with the public invited, and particularly the people that you may be considering assessing before you actually adopt policies. The code allows the engineer in the city to just kind of figure it out on your own and go through the assessment process, and you can go do it. But in today's world, we would highly recommend some type of a workshop setting where you go through different examples, you get the public involved and educate them throughout the process. So with that, let me stop for a minute, and I can't see you guys, so I'll just stop and see if there's any questions, and I can talk give you a few other examples of cities where we actually have done this, and we're about to embark on one now in the city of Adel again, and I can give you some of those examples. But have I said anything to this point that raises a question?
I'm not seeing any at this point, Terry. If you want to keep going, that's fine.
Okay, let me give you an example I'll give you two different examples of cities that have done this. One is the city of Adel. They've been a client of ours for ever since I've been in business. The city started out assessing streets in their community even before we got involved. Adel is currently a town of about 5,000 population, just west of Des Moines. It's growing, and their streets they've been through, I think they have paved almost every street in town, and they have assessed every time they've done it practically. And what they do is they take the full width of the street, and they used to take the full width of the street, and I think took a certain percentage of the cost of that street, along with the grading and the engineering costs associated with designing that street, and they assess that to the adjacent property owner. And they go through the process much like the attorney has described. Those assessments probably range on the low end, probably $5,000 or $6,000, and on the high end, probably upwards of $20,000. They have tried in the last several years, they've modified their assessment formula that we have helped them with, and they've tied it to a consumer price index. So the amount that they assess their property owners today is probably less than they did years ago. And when I say less, the dollar amount may be more, but the percentage of the total construction cost is less today than it used to be, trying to recognize the financial burden it could put on some property owners. And while a $10,000 assessment sounds excessive, and $10,000 is a lot of money, when the assessments get paid, as I think the attorney explained, you can spread the payments over a 10 or a 15-year period. spread a $10,000 payment over 10 years. That's $1,000 a year. Assessments are paid at the time you pay your property taxes. So you would have a $500 per year, per payment of your property taxes added to your property tax bill if you had a $10,000 assessment against your property. Again, they carry in, there would be interest on that unpaid balance that would be paid at the time you also pay your principal amount. One advantage of assessments, if you're a private property owner, I'll use this as an example, and let's say you have a driveway approach onto the street that's all busted up. Maybe it was poured 30 years ago, it's cracked and it's in bad shape. And if the city comes along and fixes the street and in that process decides they want to help the property owner by repaving their driveway approach, let's say that's a $5,000 cost, the private property owner can be assessed for that cost, have the city finance that cost up front through the financing of the project. When the assessment is levied, now as a private property owner with that driveway, I can have 10 years to pay off that assessment for my driveway at a very, very low interest rate. So there is some advantage of doing these assessments like this for some of the private sector work that gets done as associated with the street. And Adel has adopted that policy. The city of Carlisle, I know years ago, did that when we paved streets where there were gravel driveway approaches. We gave the property owner the option to have their driveway approach paved in concrete and assessed, or not paved at all. And several of them chose to pave their driveway and have it assessed to their private property assessment. So that's Adel, again, they have set the precedent in their community years and years ago. And so for that community to take on another assessment project, while they're not popular, it has been practiced over and over again, and virtually every property in the city has been assessed for a street project at one time or another. We were involved in a pretty controversial project in the city of Johnston, much larger project. This was probably 10 years ago. It was on Merle Hay Road, if any of you are familiar with Merle Hay Road in Johnston. And we developed a completely different assessment methodology where we took the cost of the project and spread it amongst a large subdivision that fed into Merle Hay Road. And it was legal. The assessments ranged as small as $500 a lot up to, I think, around $6,000 or $7,000 per lot. It made it all the way through the public hearing, and at the very end, the city council opted not to assess. And so we paved the road, the city paid 100% of all the costs, and they did not do the assessments. So there's a myriad of different, there's a million different ways to calculate assessments and so forth. And there are different things that can be included. As I said, not only the public street, but also the private portions of the street. So if you are embarking on this path of doing several projects maybe in the future, when Mike and I were talking at our ribbon cutting, we had just talked about the fact that you are probably, you have a very high likelihood of setting a precedent on this first project that could set the tone for many more projects to come. And whether you do assessments or not, it just seems if you put a gun to my head and asked for a recommendation from an old, experienced, bald engineer, I would just tell you to maybe pause and take a hard look at the benefits and the concerns with assessments so that you're fully educated and make a good, sound decision as to how you proceed with this first roadway project. And we can help with that if you want. So again, I'll stop there and see if you have any specific questions on maybe how you could move forward.
Terry, I have one, if you can hear me, one of the council members. My name's Jerry. Are you able to hear me?
Just barely. As louder you can speak, the better.
I'll speak out. I'm curious if these assessments are tax deductible to the owner, just like property taxes would be, and also would the interest be deductible from their income?
You know what? I'm not sure. I believe they are not, but I'm not probably qualified to answer that.
Thank you.
Christine, would you have an answer to that one?
I don't.
Okay.
We typically, we've been asked that question before, and we say, they should consult with their own tax advisor about that. Yeah.
I had the same question, Jerry. Thanks for asking
it. Terry, I got one more. The driveway approach you addressed. What if somebody wants to do their whole driveway? Does the city pay that up front and they pay them back in payments, or is that, could you explain that?
Yeah, you could. There's a petition and waiver process, which the attorney described. You can virtually assess anything that is reasonable, because at the end of the day, the property owner is going to pay that assessment. And so if you started working on, typically the driveway approach is on public property. It's in the property line, from the property line out in the street right away. That's public property, even though it's a private driveway. If you go beyond that private driveway, the private property line, you would probably want to get what's called a temporary easement. We can do a blanket easement. We can make that happen. And you can add that to the assessment roll, so the property owner can take advantage of the financing of that driveway. That gets a little sticky. We have done that with sanitary sewer service lines in unsewered communities, where we have extended the sewer line all the way up to within 5 feet of the house and included that in the cost of the assessment. So it's a little tricky, but it can be done.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Terry?
Go ahead.
I didn't have any other questions. I'm just sponging in all this information right now.
Yeah, one thing, because we're part of your community and we really want to help you guys. You're about to embark on what I think is a very significant project. As I understand, it's about a $3 million project. I think it's much bigger than that because of the precedent you're faced with. And because this is your first thing, what I would offer up, we want to continue to work with the city in a lot of different ways, but Cody is there in the audience. I would offer if you're interested, a free workshop where we could put together some examples on the street you're about to undertake and come back to the council and just in a workshop setting, kind of show you what some assessment options might be and how that would impact various properties along that road in terms of not only what their assessment would be, but how they could individually pay for that. And with that, without a lot of work, because I understand it, I think you had PFM, if I'm correct, do some financial planning for you with regards to your general obligation debt and taking on these street projects. We could do a little bit of work with them to show how maybe doing some level of assessment may leverage your general obligation debt. And if we spent maybe an hour and a half with you guys in a workshop, I think it would help you get your arms around what all this means a lot better than just kind of talking off the cuff. And we would do that for free. We could do that for you fairly quickly. I will tell you that, as I mentioned to Randy today, and he's aware of this, that if you do get into the trying to establish maybe some new policies on assessments, it will delay your current project. So if timing is critical, then you probably would not be able to get through this process and bid your street project nearly as fast as you would if you did not assess it. But in my opinion, what you're about to do is a pretty significant project and maybe making some long-term policy decisions without fully understanding what your options might be. So I don't know if that's worth anything for you guys, but we'd sure love to do that for you. A simple workshop setting and give you a little bit better idea of what it is we're talking about and how that might impact people.
Probably not a bad idea. I think the more information you get, the better off of a better decision making you'll be able to do. I think, yeah.
And I would interject here. I mean, and I thank Terry and Christine for coming. You know, I look at it, and I know talking with Randy, this is really one of those things that is a long-term policy. I mean, this is going to be impactful. And, you know, Randy certainly has, we historically in Carroll have done a lot of special assessments, but it's been a long time since we've done any magnitude. I mean, you haven't done any, so it's been 14 plus years. And so it is something that as we look at these, it really, the funding of these street projects will get more and more difficult. And I think we just have to have the discussion. That's why we wanted to have at least this workshop tonight to plant some seeds. We really weren't looking for huge action tonight. One question I do want to ask both Terry and Christine, out of your clients that do kind of total street reconstruction, you know, what is a ballpark kind of percentage maybe of clients that do special assessments?
It ranges really all over the board. I would just tell you this, if you're going to go through the process, you're going to want to make the assessments large enough so that it leverages your public dollars fairly well. I've seen them range probably on the low end, maybe 10 to 15% of the total project cost, to as high as 50 or 60% of a project cost. I can tell you the city of Ankeny is going through an assessment project. We happen to own some property, and it's a very large piece of property. Our assessment is very large, and I believe in that case, the city is assessing, I believe, about 30 to 40% of the total cost of a new roadway that's going in. So it varies all over the board. And again, we can bring you some examples if you're interested, and it's free, so it wouldn't cost you anything. But we could give you some examples of ranges where it may be 20% of the cost up to 40% of the cost, and show how that might work. And also show the impact of some private improvements as part of the assessments.
And I kind of went through my files, you know, in my 4.5 years with the firm, I've worked with 9 different cities on special assessment projects. And then my partner, Maria Brownell, also does special assessments. So I would imagine she's had a similar number of cities that she's worked with. So it's not uncommon, but as Terry said, a lot of the communities that we work with, you know, they have a long history of assessing for street projects. And so there's sort of a community expectation that that's going to be part of the deal. But.
Thanks.
And Randy can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but if I understand too, historically, we haven't done a lot of total reconstruction, and historically that first road going in has been either developer driven or special assessment.
It has in almost all cases, either developer or the city of Carroll paved their streets back in the 50s and 60s. And almost all of those were special assessments back at that time.
So, I mean, we have a history. It's just there's been this gap because we had 50s and 60s streets that now we're at that point that they're going to have to be replaced.
Just a comment and a question. I really like Terry's analogy about the drains, how in the county, how you do the drain assessment. And we all know most of us live along Drain 77. We've had these assessments done we just don't notice them because they're just so incremental, because it affects so many different property owners, and we're not talking millions of dollars, but it's not like an all-new precedent. You know, it's actually been done before. But the question I would have, I think, was it Christine? I'm sorry. Does the council have liberty to assess only addresses on Adams Street, or would it also include properties that are either adjacent to it or maybe have like a corner lot that might have a 13th Street address but butts up to Adams? Am I making that question clear?
The code is flexible, and like Terry said, it comes down to kind of your local practice or your local policy, how you determine how big your district is, who are the benefited properties to a street reconstruction project. There's no magic formula.
Okay, so when we talked earlier, just it could be 60 addresses, but we could also take in corner lots that might have a numbered street address.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Adele and Carlisle both do. If we're paving a corner lot, if we're paving the street on both sides of the corner, rather than that person getting 100% of an assessment, we calculate what that 100% assessment would be, and we reduce it by 30% for no other reason other than to recognize that it's a lot of money to charge a person for two streets to be assessed at the same time. And so there has been some, there's flexibility in how you assign those costs.
I know one community I worked in Minnesota, when they did a special assessment, now this is Minnesota, not Iowa, so it goes out the window probably, but they, by policy, in their assessment policy, said we only charge corner lots 50% of the assessment. In theory, you may get assessed 1 year and 5 years later get assessed for the other side. So that was how they dealt with it.
Yep.
Well, I think with 3 big projects that are possible with this next street, each one of these over the next course of 10 years, this is an avenue of revenue to help defray some of the cost. And even to the property owner, if they need upgrades to sewer or water systems. Definitely gives them a way to pay for this over a period of time. So,
Terry, question for you. If we decided, yes, we'd like to look at this workshop, what would be a timeline that we could have that? I mean, we actually have an extra week in here. Would it be possible to have a workshop, say December 13th or December 20th?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it wouldn't take us long. These are not going to be like detailed assessments, but we can do enough to give you some examples of what it is we're talking about. Give me your dates again. December what? 13th?
13th and 20th. Because of Christmas, we moved our last meeting up a week.
Yeah, and given the timing of what you're trying to do, I think we could be back to your council on the 13th, if you'd want to do it then, with enough to give you some pretty good ideas on whether, how all this impacts everything.
So with doing that, is that acceptable to council?
the sooner you get to going, the better, I think.
Okay. So we'll take you up on your offer, it sounds like, Terry, and
Okay.
Cody's smiling, by the way. I think he's happy about it.
Cody, we got some work to do. Yeah, I think it'd be very helpful for you guys, given what you're about to take on. We'd love to kind of help you kind of wade through it a little bit. Obviously, if you decide after that workshop, if you decide to move forward, we can talk about the level of work that would be required to kind of get you through some policy setting. And again, I would highly recommend a fairly robust public relations workshop, informational public meeting type thing, but we can talk more about that on the 13th.
Thank you, Terry.
Okay, thank you. And again, excited to be a part of Carroll and look forward to working with you guys.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Cody, did you have anything?
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
I don't think so. No, Take that in.
He pretty much took the thunder out of the sky there for you. Well, I guess you got some stuff to come up with on the 13th.
There we go.
So, all right. Any more questions for anybody?
Well, we have a few more things we'd like to
Oh,
cover on this
go
project
ahead.
tonight. This is only half of the heavy lifting tonight.
Sounds good. Keep right on going.
This is just the funding part of it. We have other decisions to make on the project. And tonight, I'll just kind of mention what they may be. As we move forward through the project, we'll continue to probably need work sessions to get decisions on how to proceed. A lot of it, in addition to that funding, is with the design part of the project and how you envision this going. Really beginning since it is a full reconstruction project, obviously pavement will be removed. And at that point in time, we would want to take a look at all of the underground utilities. You know, the municipal utilities primarily is what we'd be responsible for. Sanitary sewer being one, that is in the contract, in the engineering agreement, to be televised and analyzed, and a recommendation will come back as to if there should be some replacement included in the project before the paving's done. So that information is yet to come. The same with sanitary sewer service lines. They will also be looked at in the contract and a recommendation made as to whether they should be replaced or not. Now, then the replacement is another decision. In the current city code, the service lines serving property are the property owner's responsibility. So there is a possibility that a sewer may be working, but it may appear that it's beginning to break or collapse. And the decision has to be made whether or not to require the property owner to replace the sewer, even though the sewer is working for him at this time. Tough decisions to make, but we're trying to avoid cutting into this new street as soon as it's done. You know, that happens invariably. There was a question came up, Mike mentioned about this service line warranty program that was discussed earlier this year. They actually would replace service lines if the property owner is having a problem with them. If they're not, but they just need to be replaced because they appear like they're collapsing, or then they would not support it with the warranty. Now, for sanitary sewer service lines, Orangeburg piping is different. They have told us that they would replace Orangeburg sewer line if it's discovered, in the sewer service, because it doesn't conform to current city requirements. So, it's kind of a two ways. They don't commit on the first, but do if it's Orangeburg. Another item will be storm sewer. Of course, we believe that the storm sewer will be replaced as needed in the event that it's collapsing, or as needed to improve drainage on the street. Another question that had come up related to storm sewer was sump pump discharge. Now, Adams Street doesn't really historically appear to have a problem with sump pump discharge. So it's at this point, it's not included in the project. So it may be a decision later that you'll have to make. Water main will be reviewed for replacement of the public mains, but a decision will be made on service lines. Now, the service lines, obviously, if they're not working, a homeowner is going to replace them. But on the other hand, you're facing a lead and copper rule revision at the EPA level. And there are lead lines in this project. So a decision would have to be made if they should be replaced at this point in time. When part of that the lead and copper rule revision is currently on hold. It was to take effect, but it has been delayed for a while. I guess ultimately, if it continues as it was originally approved, the lead lines will have to be replaced in total over a period of years. So something to think about in this project. Copper service lines, certainly there's no requirement now. The lead and copper rule revision, the reason copper is in there is that if the copper lines have lead solder, they are treated the same as a lead line. So there'll have to be a determination if we believe there's lead solder in the underground lines, which there could be. In Carroll, there was a lot of solder done on service lines underground, outside buildings in the earlier days. So there could be some lead solder in them.
When we take these out to bid, when you go to that level, are they bidding assuming a certain percentage of this type of pipe? Or is all of that a change order?
No, we'd have to try to identify as much as possible. In as much as possible, yes.
Okay. Even the service lines into homes, we would know that ahead of time.
Well, we know the best we could. The city has good record, and probably as good as any record, but they're not 100% complete. And we know at a high level right now that there are about 55 service lines on this project, water service lines, and 24 of them are lead. We know that for sure. So there's quite a few. But on the other hand, on a service line, they can be replaced without tearing up the pavement, as long as the main is not under the pavement, concrete. And most of the water main is not under paving. So the customary practice for putting in a service line to the other side of the street is to bore the street. And all of our plumbers in town practice that. So if the decision is made to stay away from lead service lines for this project, we don't believe it'll seriously impact the integrity of the street in the future. So. And then the service line warranty program has weighed in on that too. They would not replace a lead water service line just because it's lead. They would replace it if the property owner was having trouble with it. And we also know that there are some galvanized service lines in this area of town. And those, in all practicality, there are going to be problems. Galvanized piping has been in the city, it corrodes, and eventually it has to be replaced. In any case, then there's the public, private utilities. Of course, there's not much we can do to require those to be upgraded or repaired or replaced. But we'll certainly make notification to all of the utility companies to consider if they are planning an upgrade, planning a replacement, to do it before the paving is put in place. Then we move on to the street. After we get off utilities, there will be information generated on alternatives to the street material. Concrete versus asphalt. And we'll have some costs on that for your consideration on selection of the type of replacement material that we proceed with. There's widening to consider. There's a couple of areas.
Can I interject one thing? 'Cause I think there's also, in addition to like the material question, there's always a cost difference. There's also the mechanics of how do we maintain it? Because we don't have ability to patch asphalt, for example. So Northwest Street, for example, when we had we had to cut into that asphalt surface, went back in concrete. And so it is one of those things you have to think about is how do we maintain that surface? So you may be able to save a little bit of money, but you end up with different materials, which also create issues long term. So it's more than just a financial consideration too.
You're probably better off to have a concrete base that you can always asphalt over though.
That's the history of Carroll.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. We want to present the information, so that you can see it and make that informed decision. But, certainly you look at the streets in Carroll, the history is concrete, Portland cement concrete. We've got some widening areas. There's one right up here from 7th to 8th Street. Who do we put a widening back? Who pays for it to be put back? That'll be a decision. Also, there's widening between 10th and 11th, certainly adjacent to the Adams Elementary School. Those are all things to consider on how they get put back and who pays. That goes back to the financing and funding of the project. Driveways, Terry had mentioned those. Sidewalks, another thing. Certainly, we believe the city will probably take care of the pedestrian curb ramps at all the crossings. But there's the opportunity for sidewalk inspection and to put any repair or replacement into the project is an option. We also will be addressing carriage walks, and there are quite a few in this project, and some even have steps in them. So those are decisions that really have to be made as to whether they go back in or steps go back in the right of way. And we have carefully tried to avoid steps in the right of way for the past number of years. But there are some locations on this project that have large steps, a lot of steps. So something to consider. And then we have trees. There's trees adjacent to the roadway. Some may be in the way for just plain constructability, just too close to the curb to get a paver between the tree and the curb. So they may have to be removed. Another safety, a clear zone behind the curb. And then the third would be just ash tree removal. Is it time to just remove them because they're ash trees? So that's kind of a 30,000-foot look at some of the decisions you get to make in the next few weeks.
For the trees, that's just in the right of way only. Correct?
Yes. Yep. And there are trees in the right of way that are well beyond interfering with the project. And, those could be left with no problem, really. So things to consider as you drive up and down Adams Street. Otherwise, I don't have anything else. We'll get into this deeper later.
I think my brain's full.
Well, certainly,
There's a lot to consider.
we wanted to present the information so we could at least, like I've been saying, plant the seed. There's a we've talked about this for the last year and a half, that there's going to be a lot of decision points with this project. Those decision points are here. This is kind of what staff has identified that we need to work through and get some guidance. So as we move forward, start thinking about these issues, and we'll take that feedback and really get policy from you guys on how we move forward with this project.
Ray, how many of those properties have that orange bird?
That we're trying to determine now.
That will be,
We'll be able to do that in two ways. Are going through our records for one, but then certainly when they televise the main line and look up those services with their video equipment, they may be able to help identify if they are or not.
okay.
Right.
Randy, will you just confirm from where to where again?
From Highway 30 to 13th Street. Probably not including the intersection of Highway 30. Probably including the intersection of 13th Street. Any other questions?
Didn't some of this get done on the streetscape?
Out here on the streetscape in the block from Highway 30 to 7, of course, all the sidewalks done and all of the curb and parking is done. So basically, it'll just be the center part of that. That'll be retained. Where it's, currently asphalt, broken up asphalt.
How is that everything?
On this topic, it is for tonight.
We gotta talk about financing sometime.
Yeah.
Well, and that, we certainly have had the preliminary discussion. But certainly the special assessment will be a big part of that. So there's, we need some guidance on that. And I think we should talk with Suzanne in particular, and work with McClure on trying to understand maybe possibility of what those limits are that what we're looking at possibly, because then we can go back to Suzanne and maybe feed that into the models she's done. And that'll give us a better picture of, what is in the property tax impact, because we know this project will have citywide property tax impacts. And with assessment, obviously that will lower the property tax impact citywide. So let's work together on that and move forward.
Do you have so we've done special assessment before, do you have a formula already?
It's been done a lot of different ways, primarily that Flint formula.
Oh.
That's the one that has really stood the test of the courts and is, certainly the method to use in today's assessments. The big decisions in assessment is, as you've been told tonight, is what do you want to assess? 100% of the street, or the center 22 feet of the street, or like Terry said, there's a million ways to assess. And those are really the decisions you want to make for your possible precedent setting for future projects.
Okay. Got a lot more information coming, I guess. So, thanks, Randy. Thanks, Christine. Appreciate it. Thanks, Cody. With that, we'll conclude the work session, and then we will move to a closed session for Iowa Code 21.5, 1C.
Mr. Bruner, are we legal to go into closed session?
Thank you. Yes, council is so authorized.
Okay. If you guys want to stay, that's fine. Just know that whatever you hear in this can't be discussed. And I know you probably get that. Yeah.
As long as legal counsel said we can.
Yeah,
I'll stick around.
been discussing that, and it's like, if you guys want to stay, because this may affect something down the road with what you guys have.
I'll stick
So,
around.
yeah,
These guys, but
that's fine.
I'll stick around. If that's all right.
Yeah, I don't mind. I think just from that purpose, that you understand that whatever you hear in this portion of the meeting, you can't talk about.
Does it go on Facebook?
Correct. Can't talk about it with anybody.
A few things down back here.
Thanks, Doug.
Could we
Have a good night.
biological before
Yep,
we-
and just for the record, before I shut
Oh,
down
yeah,
the
we'll go break.
YouTube, there's no intention to take any actions after the council meeting. They'll simply adjourn the meeting, so there'll be no actions taken. So Chantel, you can log off if you want now.
Okay.
We haven't taken.
We haven't
No.
moved into closed
Okay.
session.
Yeah,
So move to go to closed session?
there's a motion to go to move session. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. If there's no other discussion, we'll go ahead and vote, please.
Fleshner,
Yes.
Seaman,
Yes.
Dirks.
Yes.
Haley.
Yes.
Base.
Yes.